¿Qué pasa, amigos? Bienvenidos al canal y para mis suscriptores, bienvenidos de nuevo. Hoy investigamos la canción Hasta la Raíz de la cantante mexicana Natalia Lafourcade y hablaremos de lo que podemos aprender. So I recently got a comment from one of you guys saying that they saw the movie The Life List on Netflix and that there was a scene later in the movie that was really emotional where the main character's father was singing to her in Spanish, and there were no captions in the movie, so they couldn't really tell what the father was saying, but it was clear that it had a really deep emotional impact on the main character, and they asked if I could check it out and see if it was something that was worth sharing with everybody. So I went and watched the movie. A great movie, by the way. I definitely recommend it. But I found the song and I'm gonna go ahead and share it with you guys because I thought that it'd be pretty useful for us. Now, the first thing that I noticed about this song is it's absolutely full of the subjunctive mood. So I'm doing something a little different in this exercise. I'm actually gonna highlight every single time that the subjunctive is being used in green. That way we know that it's the subjunctive versus the indicative or the imperative mood. And we're gonna break down just bit by bit as we go through what we can learn from it. Now I'm going to start first off with showing the scene from the movie where the father is singing to his daughter, but that's just a very short segment of the song, so I'm going to share that first, and then we're going to move into the actual song by the original singer, and of course we'll break down along the way what we can learn about the Spanish language as a whole. So let's get right into it.
Cruzando ríos, andando selvas, amando el sol. Cada día sigo sacando espinas de lo profundo del corazón. En la noche sigo encendiendo sueños para limpiar con el humo sagrado cada recuerdo.
Okay, so we've just started up the song, and the first thing I really want to talk about is just how poetic this song is. The lines are they're absolutely beautiful, and they're full of just very vivid imagery. And like I talked about in my video on the fastest path to Spanish fluency, if you form a deep emotional connection with the content that you're using to learn Spanish, it's going to really reinforce your ability to remember the things that you learn, because you're not just reading something out of a book, you're not just trying to memorize words, but it's invoking a feeling, something that you're going to be able to recall, that you're going to remember later on. So that's really why I do these immersion exercises. So thank you again to the user who made that comment and suggested this video. I think this is going to be a good one. But the first set of lines that we've got here, they're absolutely full of the progressive aspect. You have all of these different words that use the progressive aspect. In this case, they're using the verb seguir to go with it. Now, like I talked about in my video on the progressive aspect, when you use the word seguir, it's going to convey that the ongoing action is still going on, that it hasn't finished yet. In this case, she's talking about basically what her life is like in the absence of this person, the subject of the song. So she's saying, I'm still crossing rivers, sigo cruzando ríos. She's saying, I'm still walking through forests, andando selvas, amando el sol, loving the sun. So she's still doing these things. These actions are still ongoing and they haven't finished yet. Just one quick note before we move on. Like I talked about in my video on the progressive aspect, this is something that we can't overuse this group of tenses. Just because our word in English that we're trying to translate into Spanish uses ing, that does not mean that that calls for the progressive aspect. It's only used to make a specific point about the ongoing nature of these actions. So the lines that she's using in the song, she's really calling attention to the fact that all of these things in her life are still going on even in this person's absence. Okay, let's move on.
Cuando escriba tu nombre en la arena blanca con fondo azul, cuando mire el cielo en la forma cruel de una nube gris, aparezcas tú. Una tarde suba a una alta loma, mire el pasado, sabrás que no te he olvidado. Yo te llevo dentro hasta la raíz.
I mean, it was awkward.
Okay, so our next set of lines really start to use a lot of that subjunctive that I was telling you guys about in the beginning of the video. So we've got a lot of different usages of the subjunctive leading up to that final line where it says, sabrás que no te he olvidado. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that the subjunctive is oftentimes used to indicate a certain condition that needs to be met before something else can happen. So the reason why those are going to be in the subjunctive, and then whatever happens after that is going to be using the indicative with the future tense, is because we don't necessarily know when or even if those conditions are going to be met. But once those conditions are met, we do know what's going to happen right after that. So as an example, in my work where I run a rental equipment store, when I have Spanish-speaking customers who come in and bring their machines in for us to work on them and fix them for them, I will oftentimes tell them when they drop it off, I say, lo voy a llamar cuando esté lista su máquina. So that word esté comes from the verb estar, and it's being used in the subjunctive. So when I'm saying, cuando esté lista su máquina, I'm saying when your machine is ready, but I'm using the subjunctive because that's a condition that needs to be met. But once that condition is met, once the machine is ready, I know what's going to happen from there. I'm certain of it. I'm going to call you. So it's lo voy a llamar. I'm going to call you. And we don't always have to use the future tense for this. We can also use it, for example, with commands. So if you're talking to your friend and you guys are going to be meeting up someplace, you can tell them something like, avísame cuando llegues, which means let me know when you get here. Let me know when you arrive. So cuando llegues, that's using the subjunctive mood. So that's the condition that needs to be met. And then once our friend gets here, once they arrive, we're saying avísame, which is advise me or let me know. So the condition that has to be met, we don't know when or if that condition is going to be met, but once it is, we know what we expect to happen immediately after that. So lo voy a llamar cuando esté lista su máquina, or avísame cuando llegues. And the subjunctive is always going to be used for those conditions because of that lack of certainty before whatever is going to happen after those conditions are met when we move into the indicative mood. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move from the movie into the actual song by the original singer. I definitely recommend that you guys go check out the whole thing. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to share too much of it with you. I've already had to re-edit this video a few times for copyright issues. So yeah, go check it out. But yeah, let's get started learning from Natalia Lafourcade.
Pienso que cada instante sobrevivido al caminar y cada segundo de incertidumbre, cada momento de no saber, son la clave exacta de ese tejido que ando cargando bajo la piel. Así te protejo, aquí sigues dentro.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about here is that así te protejo. Now, the only thing that's important here is that word así, which is used in a lot of different phrases in Spanish, but on its own, it's a comparative word that basically is used to say that one thing is like something else. So when we say this is like that in Spanish, we would use the word como, es como whatever, but así is like saying it's like that, or it's that way, or it's this way. There's a lot of different ways that we can put it in English, but it's basically just saying that something is this way, or that way, or like that. It's used in a lot of different phrases. One you've probably heard a lot from me, which I use very often, to say so or therefore, which is así que. Now, así que just uses the word que right after it, and it means so. So when we're saying something is the case, so something else is the case, or something is the case, therefore something else is the case, we're gonna say así que. Or another way we can say therefore is por lo tanto. Por lo tanto is basically gonna be used for a lot of the same things that we would say with así que. Now, another phrase that's really good to know is así es. Now, así es just means that's right. So when we say así es, we can just use that on its own as just an expression. Like if somebody asks you a question or somebody points out a fact that you agree with, you would say así es. And that's all you need to say. You're saying that's right. And it can be used to say, to compare things as well. Like when we say así es la vida, we're saying that's life. What we're really saying, if we want to try to translate it directly, would be life is like that. But the phrase in English is that's life, and that's how we're going to say it in Spanish. Así es la vida. And we've also got así como, which is another phrase, which means as well as or just as. And we've also got así, así, which is something that we can use like if somebody asks you how you're doing, and honestly, you're not doing too great, you're doing kind of so-so. That's where así, así comes in. Así, así means so-so. Hey, ¿cómo estás? Así, así. It's kind of just saying, hey, not too good, not too bad. It just is what it is. Now, we're going to break that down in a structured lesson with así because there's a lot of other usages and it does get a lot more complicated. So it definitely is something that Profe Austin's going to want to talk about in a structured lesson. So if you haven't subscribed yet, definitely make sure that you go ahead and click that subscribe button and ring that bell so you stay up to date on all the new videos. Okay, so the next set of lines that we're going to talk about here really talk a lot about the difference between the indicative mood and the subjunctive mood, or talking objectively about things versus talking subjectively about things, or talking about things that we are certain of and talking about things that we aren't certain of. So we've got two different things here that can be used both with the indicative and with the subjunctive. Now, the first is the phrase por más que. Now, por más que is a phrase that generally means like no matter how or as much as, and it can be used either with the indicative or the subjunctive. Now, when you're using it with the indicative, you're going to be talking about things that are going on, things that are actually happening, and then you're going to be using that to compare to something else. So, for example, if I want to say, no matter how much I try to lose weight, I can't, that would say, por más que intento bajar de peso, no puedo. So I am trying to lose weight in this case, and no matter how much I try, I can't do it. Now, if we want to use this with the subjunctive, it's going to be talking about things that we aren't certain of, or you talking subjectively about things that aren't necessarily happening, but they might happen, they might not happen, or we don't know how they're going to happen. So in the case of the song, the line is, por más que crezca, vas a estar aquí. So she's saying, no matter how much I grow, you're going to be here. So she doesn't really know exactly what's going to happen as far as how she's going to grow, in what way she's going to grow, how much she's going to grow. So that's really a level of uncertainty there. But she knows no matter how much she grows, that person's going to be there with her. So, por más que crezca, vas a estar aquí. No matter how much I grow, you're going to be here. Now, the other line that we've got here uses the term aunque. Now, aunque is a really useful term, which generally means although, or it can be used to say even though or even if. Now, the distinction between the indicative and the subjunctive with aunque, it can be a little easier to understand, because if we say even though in English and we want to translate that into Spanish, we're going to be using the indicative. Whereas if we say even if in English, we move that into Spanish, it's going to be using the subjunctive. Now, what's the reason for that? Well, it's the same reason as before. Even though we use in English when we're talking about something that we know is true, something that is definitely happening, something that we for sure believe to be the case, and even if is going to be used more for hypothetical things or conditions or stuff like that. So in Spanish, an example of using aunque with the indicative is, aunque he leído este libro 10 veces, no lo entiendo, which is, although I've read this book 10 times, I don't understand it. So we're saying even though, we're talking about something that is definitely true, but we're comparing it with something else that it basically goes against it, that contrasts against it. And the line in the song, which uses the subjunctive, is aunque yo me oculte tras la montaña. So she's saying, even if I hide myself behind the mountain. So she's saying, basically, I know what's definitely true, but I don't know in this case what is going to lead up to that, or what might happen as far as to contextualize that. So she's saying, even if I hide behind the mountain, she doesn't know if she is going to hide behind the mountain. It's not happening right now, so it is more hypothetical, it is more subjective, it is less certain that that's going to happen, and so that's why she's going to be using the subjunctive in this case. So although I hide behind the mountain, or even if I hide behind the mountain, is really the best way to say it here. Aunque yo me oculte tras la montaña. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about here, we're going to go ahead and break down the name of the song, Hasta la Raíz. So the line is, Yo te llevo dentro hasta la raíz. So the two things I really want to talk about here are that first word dentro and the other word hasta. Now, dentro, which means inside, has a couple of different variations, including adentro and por dentro. Now, the differences between these are somewhat subtle. Generally speaking, adentro, it has more to do with a movement, like when we say we're going inside of a building. Vamos adentro del edificio. Or the word por dentro, or the phrase por dentro, generally it has more to do with something being contained within something else. So if we want to say the box has chocolates inside, la caja tiene chocolates por dentro. Now, dentro is just the generic sense of the word, which just means inside. Now, if we want to say that something is inside of something else, we're going to add the word de. So when we say dentro de, we're saying inside of. So if you want to say that something is inside of something else, you say dentro de. So when we want to say the papers are inside of the desk, we would say los papeles están dentro del escritorio. So dentro de is inside of, and then el escritorio, and de and el are going to contract to form del. Dentro del escritorio. Now the next thing that we've got here is hasta, which this is a word that has a lot of different usages in Spanish, but generally speaking, it's going to be used to indicate things like even. When we say something like even the bottle is a work of art, we say hasta la botella es una obra de arte. Now, we can also use the word incluso for that. So incluso in this case is going to be very similar to the word hasta. Now, in the case of the line in this song, hasta la raíz, she's saying down to the root. So in this case, hasta is being used to indicate limits. So it can mean until, or it can mean up to, or it can mean down to. So hasta can be used to say that something is going to meet a certain threshold, it's going to meet a certain limit. So in this case, she's saying hasta la raíz, yo te llevo dentro hasta la raíz. So she's saying, I carry you down to the root. And another usage for hasta is very similar to the word a. And in this case, it's going to be used to talk about things like travel. So when we say that someone is going from one place to another place, a lot of times we would use de paired up with a. So if you're saying, I went from, I don't know, China to the United States, you would say, fui de China a los Estados Unidos. However, if you want to indicate that travel or the distance is something that's really more remarkable, it's really worth noting how far you went, you can use desde and hasta as basically amplifiers. So if we say, fui desde China hasta los Estados Unidos, that's saying the same thing. I went from China to the United States. But in this case, it's more like saying, I went from China all the way to the United States. So it's being used as an amplifier to indicate that travel, that distance that we had to cross is just a much greater distance, that it's worth noting how big it was.
Y por más que crezca, vas a estar aquí. Aunque yo me oculte tras la montaña, encuentro un campo lleno de caña. No habrá manera, mi rayo de luna, que tú te vayas.
Okay, amigos, well, that's all the time I've got for us today. Muchísimas gracias por ver. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you especially to Brett L80219 for your comments suggesting today's immersion exercise. I greatly appreciate it. I had a lot of fun watching the movie. I hope you guys all go check it out. It's a very good movie on Netflix, but definitely worth a watch. And if you guys see anything out there in the Spanish-speaking world, if maybe you're just curious what they're saying and you want to have it translated, or if you feel like it's something that we could all learn about the Spanish language as a whole from it, or maybe it's just something fun that you think would be nice for everybody to see. No matter what, let me know. I'll check it out, and if it's something that I feel is worth sharing, I'll make that video happen for you. Thank you again for tuning in. Have a great day. Hasta la próxima.